The haze encompassing the mountains grew denser as we rounded the next corner. My dread grew with every step on the uneven, muddy ground. My heart had begun to hurt from the strain of the past few hours. My 3 friends and I had snuck off to an old abandoned ghost town just outside my hometown of Conifer, Colorado. It was a short break during the first semester of my senior year of high school, and we were just planning on checking the place out because we were genuinely curious. That all changed, however, when one of my friends, Max, brought a 6-pack of beer. He waited until we were inside until revealing it, as if it were some grand and fantastic surprise, but he didn't get the reaction out of us that he was expecting. "What the fuck, man?" I shrieked, immediately getting him to shove the case back into his backpack. "You've got to be kidding me," I cried. "What the hell were you thinking?" He looked at me with that stupid smile he always had plastered across his face. It slowly faded, however, as he saw how genuinely concerned the rest of us were. "What?" he scoffed. "Jesus, you guys. Is anybody here older than 4? It's our last year together. Why the hell can't we have some fun?" I frantically hushed him to a whisper, glancing around nervously. "Dude," I hissed, "you do understand that we're trespassing here, right? Breaking and entering is bad enough, but I figured we could maybe get away with feigning ignorance and avoid that charge if we get caught. But what the hell do you think they'll do if they catch us with that? Jesus Christ, Max, think a little." His face showed some regret for a second or two before he quickly masked it with that stupid-ass smirk again. "Relax," he laughed, putting his hand on my shoulder. "We're not going to get caught. Come on, who the hell even patrols a place like this? Look around you, man, there's no one here." I angrily shook his hand off me. "Like hell they don't," I cried, my voice a harsh whisper. "We've been over this already. We could tell just from our binoculars that at least 6 of these houses have cameras visible on their exteriors alone." He scoffed again. "And who the hell is actually gonna watch that footage, huh? Jesus," he laughed. "Lighten up a little, man." I glared at him, about ready to snap his neck when Penny suddenly spoke up. "Max, how about you shut the hell up for 1 second and stop trying to cover for your stupid-ass mistakes?" We were all completely taken aback. That wasn't like her at all. She was usually the quiet one, certainly never one to engage in conflicts. Her sandy blonde hair rustled in the chilling wind of the late evening. Her dark blue eyes nervously glanced around, her lightly freckled cheeks hot with rage. It was clear that she was incredibly nervous. "John is right," she said, her voice quickly dropping back down to a whisper. "This place is way more heavily guarded than it should be. Even with the blackout, I'm becoming more and more convinced that they'll have a backup generator." "Now you guys have gone past the point of paranoid," Max argued. "This is a damn ghost town. You think they installed a generator just to keep a few cameras running for a planned blackout that is going to last less than 4 hours? Look at those cameras," Penny whispered, starting to get seriously worried now. I see them, Max said. "I get it, cameras, wow, scary." "No," Penny cried, "I mean look at them, closely. What do you notice about them in relation to the buildings?" She handed him the binoculars and he grudgingly looked through. He was the biggest out of all of us, more from muscle than fat. His hands were like a bricklayer's, looking something like catcher's mitts. The tiny binoculars looked entirely silly in his massive paws as he squinted through them. As he lowered the tiny device, rubbing his buzz-cut black hair in impatience, he sighed heavily. "They look like cameras still," he said. "Wise ass," Penny growled. "They look new and clean, cleaner than they should be. Someone is performing regular maintenance on them. While the buildings are falling apart, someone is taking loads of time to make sure those are not only operating, but in mint condition. Tell me why the hell someone would do that." Max stammered for a second before Penny cut him off again. "Not only that, but what the hell are those black boxes in the far trees?" Max sighed and glanced again through the binoculars. "Look," he said, "I don't see anything. I'm serious. I see where you're going with this, but I genuinely think you might be overthinking this a little too much." "No," Penny whispered harshly. "John, look, I swear to God there are some sort of large black rectangles hidden in the far trees." I exchanged glances with Max before taking the binoculars and scanning the trees. I didn't see anything. Listen, Penny, I sighed. The light is fading. It will be dark in about 10 minutes here, which may be why I can't see anything, and I honestly hate to do this, but I'm gonna have to agree with Max on this one. I'm guilty of this as well, but maybe we should just calm down a little bit. I'm sure our nerves are making us blow things out of proportion. Okay? She looked betrayed, casting her deep blue eyes downwards for a few seconds before loosening up and taking a deep breath. I suppose you're right, she reluctantly breathed. What the hell is this? Max poked. She listens to you, eh? I glanced at her and smiled. She blushed slightly and folded her arms, suddenly finding her shoes incredibly interesting. All right, lovebirds, Sarah jeered. Like John said, we've got about 10 minutes until total darkness, and then about 30 more until the power outage. We're just outside the center of town, and so far we haven't been spotted as far as we know. Or are we just chilling here until the outage? Sarah was a lot like Penny in the sense that she was fairly quiet, but entirely different in that she was a born leader. While Penny quietly shuffled along behind others, Sarah was the one you could count on to make a tough decision when it came to it. She had blindingly bright blue eyes and pitch black hair that was constantly obscuring her vision. She was childhood friends with Max. The two had known each other since preschool or something, and acted more like siblings than friends. I nodded at her. Remember, I said quietly, we only use flashlights if absolutely necessary. We've also got to check to make sure the cameras are knocked out if we plan to get any further than this. We all glanced out the shattered windows of the old house we were crouched in. The town really was incredibly eerie at night. The few sparse areas of artificial light made everything seem distant and corroded, as if it was being consumed by the approaching darkness. The town always had a haunting vibe to it, however, even in the daytime. The very premise of it seemed off. Even though it was barely even a town, more just like several clusters of shoddy rundown wood cabin-like structures, it was clear that quite a few people lived there at one point. Despite this, however, the land was all marked as private property now. Confirmed rumors said that the town was evacuated a long time back, but reasons for this are nothing but speculations. Gas leak, poisoned water, unstable ground structure, anything and everything has been asserted. Whatever the case, however, it appeared as though someone was able to buy up the entirety of the land and prevent any development from taking place through the passing years. What resulted was a ghastly sight, fragmented structures fading into oblivion as the area was reclaimed by the surrounding forest. It sat at the base of a tall hill, what I assumed to be more forest on the other side. Naturally, various haunting rumors had risen about the place, and being fascinated with ghost stories, I couldn't resist getting a group together to check it out. I had just moved to Colorado a little over a year ago, and despite many people's warnings about friends of theirs getting arrested at the site, curiosity got the best of me. The police seemed to have an uncanny ability to find and arrest intruders at that town, they always said. I took this as a challenge, although I'm not usually one to do anything daring. I figured if anyone could, me and my friends would be able to check out the place to our heart's content. When I heard about a scheduled blackout that had arisen from problems at a nearby power plant, the opportunity was just too good to pass up. I begged and pleaded and finally got everyone to come along. I was sure tonight would be the perfect chance, but the longer I waited, the more my heart began to sink. I hadn't been sure what I was hearing at first, but now I was absolutely positive. I could faintly hear the hum of a generator. After a long while of staring out a window at the gathering darkness, I turned back to my friends so I could tell that they could hear it too. Shit, I cursed under my breath. Not only do they have a generator, but they already have it on. They were entirely prepared for this. Max cursed too, louder. Who the hell is they? Who honestly gives a shit about this place? So, are we bailing? Sarah asked. I sighed. Well, it seems a shame to go home after all this. Not just a shame, Max broke in. This is bullshit. I sure as hell ain't going home. I honestly think we should leave, Penny quietly interjected, her dark eyes filled with worry. Something still feels off about this. Well, everything we've seen so far has basically told us to fuck off, I laughed. No, she stammered. Well, I mean, yes, but it's more than that. I just feel wrong. I feel sick, like something horrible is happening here. Oh, Jesus Christ, Max scoffed. You've got to be kidding me. Drama much? You know what's the best part about generators? They can be turned off. I looked at him incredulously. God, I cried, is everyone here insane? Penny, I'm sure it's just your nerves getting to you, and I'm sure there's nothing to be worried about, but I also don't agree with you, Max. That's definitely going too far. No, Sarah softly spoke, brushing the hair out of her eyes lighting up in the moonlight. Honestly, after coming all the way here and after this anticipation and excitement, I kind of feel like we should do whatever it takes. Hell yeah, Max quietly cheered, offering a fist bump to Sarah, which she refused. I'm not agreeing with you, dipshit, she grumbled. I'm just not backing out. Well, Sarah and I can go be badasses if you two are too pussy to live a little, Max sneered. Sarah hit him on the shoulder. Really, Max? She hissed. Going for the peer pressure thing? What are you, a kindergartner? She brushed the black hair out of her eyes and turned to look at me and Penny. Really, she said, with a softer tone. We will do this with or without you, but I honestly think you guys should come. It will be a lot of fun. I guess you're right, I said, suddenly finding myself backing down on my own trip. I'm sorry for getting discouraged so easily. This was my idea, after all. I paused for a second before continuing. Me and Penny are in as well. I glanced at her and gave a grinning nod. She had always had a crush on me since I moved in. It was painfully obvious at times. I was never much good at stuff like that, though, so I always pretended not to notice or just deflected it with humor. I felt terrible and a little sick using it against her now, but I figured it was the only way to get her to come along. She blushed, her blue eyes darting away from my gaze, looking out the window. Her hands fiddled nervously with a ring on her finger as she thought, clearly fighting every instinct she had as she quietly shook her head. Yes. The following silence was so painful that I actually wished the generator was louder. I looked at Max or Sarah for support, but they just kinda gave me half-assed looks of, I don't know. Finally, I glanced at my watch and sprung to my feet in an attempt to dissolve the terrible silence. All right, I whispered. We've got less than 10 minutes until the blackout. What's the plan, Max? He stood up along with Penny and Sarah and turned to face all of us. All right, he said. So I don't know about you guys, but I haven't seen the lights flicker at all this whole time, meaning they haven't actually switched power to the generator yet. They're most likely trying to stay on the main power for as long as possible, so it can be assumed that there will be a minuscule time from when the power shuts off to when the generator begins powering the lights, during which any cameras will be inactive. Since the blackout is set for a specific time, we can predict it perfectly. We looked at each other. If it's just a portable generator for tonight like we're assuming, Max continued, there shouldn't be any cameras stationed around it, but we should plan for that just in case. So the plan is to shut it off in the short duration when the power switches. We'll wait out of sight of any cameras until the outage and then make a mad dash for the emergency stop. It's simple, but it should work if we can pull it off. We all nodded at him. Well, everyone except Penny, who seemed to grow more and more sick with each passing minute. She appeared to be practicing breathing exercises, trying to calm her panic. She ran her hands through her knotted hair, closing her eyes tight. So, I whispered, glancing at her with concern, we have to find the generator then, or at least its general location before the town goes dark, right? Right, Max whispered. Me and Sarah can go do that. You and Penny can stay here. That way, if something goes wrong, only two of us are caught on tape, eh? I chuckled and nodded, just catching Penny's gaze as it darted away. Sarah, you know the layout of the cameras we're aware of so far, I said. If getting close to the generator means getting in their line of sight, abort, okay? Sarah and Max looked at each other, nodded, and then snuck off towards the sound. As soon as they were out of view, I turned to Penny and awkwardly mumbled out, "Hey, are you okay?" "Not really," she breathed, facing away. "Hey, if it gets bad or too much for you, you can always turn around and go, okay?" I said softly, lightly touching her shoulder. She flinched. "Would you really leave with me?" she quietly asked, her eyes worriedly darting to an outside light as it flickered slightly. A light draft snaked its way through the rotting house, carrying the scent of decay. "If so," she continued, "I want to leave now." I stammered, trying to take up a reassuring tone. "Hey now," I fake smiled. I understand your worries, but being a little scared is kind of the point." I checked my watch. 5 minutes until the blackout. "Of course I'll go with you," I continued, laughing. "It's not like I'd let you walk all the way back alone. I'm not a monster." I sat down beside her, causing her to blush even more. "But please," I continued, "we've put a lot of work into this trip so far. Couldn't you at least stay for a few more minutes, just until a little after the blackout?" She still didn't look at me, but her panicked tone seeped out into the night. "I really don't think I can," she finally said, turning to look at me, looking as if she was having slight trouble breathing. "John," she continued, "I feel absolutely sick with fear. I don't expect you to understand, but I'm positive that something horrible will happen to us here." She ran her hand through her hair, glancing out the window, trying to take deep breaths but finding herself unable. "Please," she stammered. "John, I'm begging you. You know, the only reason I came on this damn trip anyway was because you asked me to." "Oh, come on," I laughed. "Sarah asked you long before I did." "Yeah, and I said no to her," she said, her face flushing red. "I told her I would never do something like that in my entire life. I said the very idea made my skin crawl with horror." She paused for a minute before speaking. "But then you asked me." That shut me up. I looked at her in the dim light, her cheeks bright red, her face contorted in worried silence, arms folded across her chest as she stared at the ground. Come on, stand up," I said, offering her a hand and rising to my feet. "I understand that you're scared," I continued as she just looked at me, "and I'm not trying to belittle your feelings, but I guarantee you everything will be fine. You'll look back on this and wonder what you were so worried about." She shook her head. "I know I'm being lame," she said. "I really do hate to take the role of the worrier in the group. I hate for my only purpose to be to express my fears, but I've genuinely never felt so unnerved in my life." She grabbed my hand and hesitantly rose to her feet. I want to seem fun and high-spirited like you guys," she continued, now on her feet. "I promise you that I could usually get over something like this and crack a joke or two, but not this time." She looked down at her hands clasped together and took a big, shaky breath. "Please just stay for the blackout," I said softly, placing my other hand on hers. She looked like she was about to have a breakdown, so many conflicting emotions running through her. She looked at me, her deep blue eyes eerily reflecting the dim light of the room. I gave a big smile and she finally gave in, muttering, "Okay," under her breath, seemingly hating herself for agreeing. I gave a little cheer and without a moment's hesitation walked her outside, eventually standing to peer around a corner of a house out into the main courtyard. "What are we doing here?" she asked nervously. "Come on," I laughed. "It will look cool when the lights go out. I want to be able to see it." I smiled at her, but she just looked sick, wringing her shirt in her hands. I looked down at my watch to see that we had less than 15 seconds left. "Want to count down?" I whispered, nudging her slightly. No, she said, starting to breathe heavy as if having a panic attack. Just please, let's get out of here. Hey, I said, lightly grabbing her shoulders. It'll be fine. The lights went dead. The darkness rushed forwards instantly and swallowed everything it touched. My heart stopped in my chest as the seconds dragged on. The sound of the generator was still humming in the distance. My nervousness quickly erupted into panic as the generator remained on and the lights abruptly flickered slightly. Suddenly, a horrible grinding sound echoed through the darkness, followed by the screeches of shearing metal. Hidden within the gruesome uproar, I was certain I could barely make out a horrific scream. The faintly flickering lights went dead. The reverberation slowly disappeared into the night air, and then all was quiet. So quiet. Cold shivers ran up my spine, and I felt Penny grow faint next to me. We glanced at each other's pale and sickly faces before breaking eye contact and darting towards the sound. As we wove through the dark, decaying houses, I could hear my own heart pounding in my chest. The oppressive night closed in so fast on the lightless town that it seemed as though the world had just fallen away into oblivion. We rounded a corner and hurriedly climbed a fence to nearly slip on a dark substance on the other side. I flicked on my flashlight to see a gruesome scene. There, just in front of me, was Max, breathing heavy, staring straight ahead with unseeing eyes. A large piece of metal shrapnel crudely jutted out from where his left eye should have been. He was delirious, convinced that he was on fire, that his skin was melting away. "My fingers," he whispered. "Please go find them. They're crawling away." I scrambled to his other side and nearly fainted at the sight. His right hand was cleaved down to a stump, infinitely more shrapnel pieces jutting out of his splintered arm, his bones laying like wood shavings around him. "What happened?" I cried, looking at Sarah, whose right leg appeared to be shattered in several places, shrapnel of Max's bones jutting out of her shoulder. A deep gash flowed blood down her face. Her usually bright eyes were dim and gray. She breathed, fighting to maintain consciousness. We panicked when the lights went out and we ran around the corner to turn off the generator. We didn't expect this. I looked around with a flashlight and my blood crystallized, my breath catching in my throat. There were countless cameras, backed by immense floodlights, and the area itself was surrounded by what was now clearly visible as a highly electric fence. A very small portion of the generator itself was now just a smoldering heap of broken components, sheared metal, and torn belts, but it was clear that it was absolutely huge. The floor was a gleaming chrome surface. Numeric keypads adorned the walls and warning signs flashed their horrible colors, depicting gruesome death scenes. We both lost it," Sarah continued. "There is no off button. We knew that the power would come back on in a matter of seconds, and we knew we couldn't climb the fence again once that happened. We would have been trapped in here. In the last seconds, Max tried to shove a rock into the belt, and the thing fucking tore itself to pieces." "Oh God, Jesus, we're going to die here." She paused a minute before choking out, "What the hell is this place?" She then lost consciousness and collapsed to the reflective chrome face up. Her gray shirt slowly grew heavy with her own blood. Me and Penny locked eyes. A horrible mix of emotions surged through me. Fear. Fear was definitely there, but it was trumped by something else. Never had I felt more regret in my entire life. I didn't need to look to see that Max had died beside me. My hand was pressed against his chest, and I could no longer feel it heaving up and down in panicked breaths. All I could feel was his warm, sticky blood flowing in torrents down my arm. Then, everything happened at once. The lights faintly flickered, a huge siren suddenly booted up from over the next hill, and the faint whoop of several police sirens could be heard approaching the outskirts of the town. Not having a second to waste and absolute panic taking over, I grabbed Penny and practically threw her over the fence, scrambling over it myself milliseconds later. We barely made it to the other side and began taking off into the woods when the lights flickered again. And then suddenly the entire town erupted in blinding, purging white light. The electric fence hummed anew and brilliant floodlights shone down from every angle, coming from the distant trees. Penny had been right all along. Suddenly, I threw myself and Penny to the ground. Several black police cars screeched to a halt by the generator, men jumping out and aiming rifles at my two friends. I had known all along that I had left Sarah behind. I knew she wasn't dead yet, but I had to make a choice. I had to get me and Penny out of there. There was no way I could have saved her too. I ran this thought through my head over and over at blinding speed, but all it did was make me feel sicker. The armored men surrounded the gated plant with high beams attached to their weapons. Sarah stirred slightly, just barely shifting her weight, and then the night air was suddenly shattered by the sound of machine gun fire. Her body was ripped apart by molten metal, her blood splattering across the glossy chrome. She didn't even have time to scream. From every direction, clips unloaded until her body lay, a mangled mess, carved into pieces and strewn about like dirty laundry. Indistinguishable speech ripped through the air as the militia reloaded and then began again, further tearing apart her broken form. I slowly crawled backwards, motioning for Penny to do the same, but her eyes just stared straight ahead, her face horribly plain, unable to process what was happening. "Come on," I whispered. "Penny, we have to get out of here." She didn't move. I don't think she even heard me. I glanced behind me and froze. At first I thought it was snow. The area was so blinding white that my eyes burned. Finally, I squinted just enough to be able to see what I was truly looking at. Some sort of facility. Painted entirely in reflective chrome, a large rectangular building sat directly behind us, just over the hill. It was surrounded by another, far taller electric fence, one I had nearly backed into. Sirens blared and yet more intense floodlights shone down from every angle around the facility. All I could do was watch on in horror as the armed men riddled Sarah's corpse with bullets again and again, finally sending someone to cautiously advance upon her body. I was sickened and utterly horrified. Why the hell did they shoot her so damn much? Surely they knew she was long dead after the first few bullets. And why only her? They left Max's corpse entirely alone. I slowly crawled next to Penny and placed my head next to hers. I didn't know how I could face her again, and I doubted I would have been able to if the situation didn't absolutely demand it. "Penny," I whispered, "how are you doing? I'm really sorry, but we have to go." Her glazed-over eyes eventually fell on me, but slowly slipped away to the ground, as if I wasn't even there. "Penny," I urged, laughing painfully, we really need to go, okay? It's going to be fine. I couldn't go on any longer. How the hell could I say that to her? Everything was not fine. Nothing was fine. Not only had I killed Max and Sarah, but we were going to die too. All because I was too fucking stupid to believe her. I sank my head to the ground, practically tearing out my hair in hopelessness. Tears streamed down my face as I watched one of the armed men shoot several bullets directly into Sarah's skull from point-blank range before turning and signaling to the others. From within the cluster, a man in fire-retardant gear slowly stepped forwards, and without a moment's hesitation set Sarah's body ablaze with several jets from a horrific flamethrower. The men stood still as her body crackled and popped, the sound of her searing flesh barely audible over the sirens. I grabbed Penny and slowly stood her up. "We have to go," I cried louder now. "Penny, I won't let you die too." Her face suddenly showed some refreshing signs of emotion as I hoisted her to her feet. First confusion, but that emotion quickly dissolved into agony. Her distant eyes welled up with tears, and a misplaced smile slowly broke out across her face. "That would be okay," she stated softly, her grip on me loosening. "No," I cried. "Penny, it's fine. Don't say that. We'll get out of here. I promise I'll never doubt you again. Jesus Christ, Penny, I swear to God, I'll never do a damn thing ever again unless you okay it." As we disappeared into the surrounding hills, the sound of several helicopters could be heard approaching, their deep rumbles slicing into the night air, search beams painting the ground with blinding white. We took cover under a fallen tree as far away from the facility as we could possibly manage on our weak legs. The haze of the early morning encompassed the surrounding mountains, and the rhythmic chopping of helicopter blades could be heard both distant and far. And although several teams of men passed close by us from time to time, none of them stopped to look for us. They were all being led by dogs, and it appeared as though they were looking for someone or something specific. The frigid morning air turned the dew into crystalline structures of jagged ice as me and Penny lay huddled, shivering under that rotten, decaying tree. No words were exchanged between us. Our minds were far too occupied with the horrors we had just witnessed to process any new information. And that's when it happened. Slowly stumbling into view was a form so familiar that I couldn't help but stare in horror. Sarah. I looked closer and squinted, absolute dread compressing my lungs, making it hard to breathe. There was no doubt. The ghastly form staggering through the dead, frosted over trees looked just like her. But surely it couldn't be. I had watched her body be torn apart to a hideous extent right in front of me. Seeing her now made me feel no relief or assurance. There was something so wrong about the way it moved that my heart practically ceased to beat as I stifled my breathing. Penny clearly didn't feel the same way, however, as she suddenly bolted out of the tree and stood upright. Her haunted eyes brimmed with tears as a deranged yet hopeful smile faintly appeared on her face. "Penny, no," I whispered. "Penny, that's not Sarah." She didn't listen to me, however, and started stumbling towards the shuffling creature. I shot out from under the tree and ran to grab her arm, holding her back. "Penny," I quietly yet desperately urged. "Please, I promise you this. I know you're upset, and I know you just want everything to be okay. Hell, I would do anything to make things right after everything I've screwed up, but this is not right." She tried to shake herself free, and her cold eyes glanced at me briefly. "After everything," she mumbled more to herself than anything, "you're still not trusting me." My heart sank and my grip slipped, my hands falling uselessly to my sides. I still knew that approaching that thing was the last thing she should have done, but her words made me feel such despair that I couldn't do anything as she started walking forwards again, extending out her hand. I felt as if I had been shot. I knew this was my fault all along, but hearing Penny admit it to my face was more than I could take. The world seemed to move in slow motion as Penny approached the ghost, and I noticed something dreadful about it. Shielding its eyes with its hands, it was hunched over as it staggered forwards, and 4 horrific, barbed chain tentacles were splayed out from its arched back, ripping out of the fabric of its blood-stained gray t-shirt, dragging along the ground. Leaves and dirt clung to the metal links, sticking to the dark crimson blood splattered along it. The creature slowly stopped as it heard Penny approaching, and its hand slowly fell from its face. As I watched in horror, the lynx further snaked out of its back, extending out into the air as more chains visibly squirmed underneath its exposed skin. Light blood dripped from the gashes from which the chains erupted. The flesh surrounding the area was entirely singed, blackened, and burned away. As Penny approached, the chains began to vibrate, the sound of ringing metal becoming ear-shatteringly high-pitched as the leaves touching the chains began to smoke. Finally finding the strength to move, I darted forwards towards Penny and reached for her arm, shouting, "Run!" I grabbed Penny and jerked her backwards just as the creature pivoted slightly and a hideous tendril of blackness slashed through the air. I felt the hot spray of blood on my face. At first I thought it was my own, but as I felt Penny's body grow heavy in my arms, I opened my eyes slowly, somehow knowing the truth full well before I even saw the hideous sight. Inches from my face, I was greeted with a rapidly vibrating, barbed metal spear, having been threaded through Penny's neck. I recoiled in horror and let go of Penny's body. She slumped forwards, unable to fall to the ground, held up by the chain puncturing her throat. As I watched, her neck stopped gushing blood as the wounds were cauterized, singed black by the vibrating metal and then turning dead white, steaming in the cool air. Then, the creature slashed the chain downwards. The hot metal sliced through Penny's chest like a knife through butter. In a horrific shower of vaporized blood and ruptured organs, Penny's body was cleaved in half, falling to the ground in a gruesome, smoldering heap. I collapsed to my knees, anguish overriding my ability to move. The creature let its chains drop to the dirty ground and lightly brushed the hair out of its face. I now saw that it wasn't Sarah at all. Rather, it was a girl of slightly younger age, and other than sharing the same basic stature and black hair, the two looked nothing alike. For one, while Sarah had blue eyes, this girl had eyes of the darkest brown possible, almost appearing black. She didn't look around at all, however. It didn't seem as if she could see. She was either entirely blind or close to it. There was another thing similar about it and Sarah, though. I thought back and realized that Sarah had been wearing a gray shirt just as this girl was. A sudden realization shook me to my core and rage suddenly consumed me. "You," I coughed, faintly staggering to my feet. The girl whirled around to face me, the chains beginning to vibrate. Without a moment's hesitation as I tried to continue, a chain slashed forwards, and in the next second I was pinned against a tree, the scalding metal boiling the blood in my shoulder. Another chain snaked out from behind the girl and slowly slithered to my temple, seconds from boring through my head. "Is this how you say thank you?" I screamed, agony coursing through my veins. The chain didn't stop, and I could feel the metal begin to press against my head, the sound of sizzling flesh reaching my ears before the pain even started. "Is this what we get for letting you out?" I cried, writhing in agony. The chain suddenly stopped, resting where it lay for a second or two. "Is this what we get after my friends gave their lives for you? After Max got his fucking arm torn off turning off the power to the facility? After Sarah, a happenstantial look-alike, took round after round of machine gun fire meant for you?" The chain slowly retracted and slumped to the floor, steaming against the cold ground. "Aunt Penny!" I screamed, trying to wiggle free of the chain in my shoulder. She just wanted to pretend that everything was okay. She just wanted to believe so badly that you were Sarah, wanted to believe that she hadn't just watched her friend get torn to shreds in front of her. She wanted to believe so damn badly that she ran to you just hoping to smile again, and you fucking tore her to pieces. Tears streamed down my face as I wept. Is that how you fucking say thank you? The girl stared at me, emotionless, sliding the chain out of my shoulder and letting me collapse to the ground. She didn't blink. I don't think she had eyelids at all. She said, her face stoic and unyielding. Shut the hell up, I screamed, staggering to my feet. And don't flatter yourself, I didn't mean it. We didn't do any of that for you. This whole scenario has been some series of completely fucked up coincidences. We didn't mean to have any part in this. We had nothing to do with any of this. I staggered towards her, my fist clenched in rage. She wanted to go home, I cried. The girl you just tore in half. She begged and pleaded me to go home, I sobbed, my throat closing up. And I didn't believe her. I told her everything would be fine. She wasn't even supposed to be here. I sunk to the ground again, lightly resting my hand on Penny's pale arm. It's all my fault, I said through clenched teeth, turning back to the creature. I laughed through my tears. Those lights, I chuckled. If I thought they were unbearably bright, I can't even imagine what they did to someone who can't close their eyes. I looked at her closely. And not only that, I continued, but to someone whose pupils don't constrict. The girl stepped back slightly, her eyes searching my face. I laughed. I thought you just had brown eyes at first, but that's not true, is it? I staggered to my feet again, gripping my shoulder. You have green eyes, I smiled. Brilliant green eyes. But I can only see the faintest ring of emerald. Your pupils are dilated more than should be possible. Some light color bled into the girl's face, but her eyes dropped to the ground. She stammered as if to speak, but I cut her off again. I should have stopped her from approaching you, but I was too damn afraid of fucking up again. Too afraid that I would make her hate me more. But now I guess her opinion of me can't get any worse. I gave a pained laugh and cringed as I felt my shoulder. The wound was neatly cauterized and not all that large. I could still move my arm if absolutely necessary. I leaned against the tree and slowly slid to the ground, exhausted, fighting to keep conscious. We stayed like that in silence for quite some time. Me leaned against the tree, the girl standing silently, unwilling to let her guard down. The sky rumbled distant and deep, and the occasional flash of lightning illuminated far-off mountains. The girl stood unnaturally still. You don't talk a lot, do you? I eventually said, looking up at the sky. I glanced over to her to see her shake her head slowly. There's rarely anyone to talk to. Her faint voice seeped out into the cold air like a dense sludge. I slowly sat back against a tree and looked up at the sky again. After a long silence, her faint voice again drifted. But I like listening. I liked listening to you talk. Listening to me rant and have a mental breakdown, you mean? I laughed silently. Gee, thanks. There was a long silence before she said, That's not what I meant. I know, I laughed. I'm just messing with you. I would say that I'm going through a lot of shit right now, but you're standing there with fucking chains erupting out of your back, so I imagine I'd be one-upped on the sob story. Neither of us spoke for some time. In truth, there wasn't much to say. We both knew it. Eventually, however, I blurted out, Are you blind? Currently, yes, she said. I sat, waiting for her to elaborate or something, but when I looked at her, she just stood there, entirely straight-faced and stoic. Oh, I stammered. Currently? As in you could see before? Before today, I had full use of my eyes, she said, again leaving it at that, as if giving answers to essay questions. Okay, I said slowly. So the facility's floodlights blinded you? That is their purpose, she stated. Silence again. I breathed loudly, exasperated. So, I said, do you miss seeing? Her face now grew perplexed, her emotionless mask slipping slightly. Miss seeing? She echoed. I'm not sure, but I suppose I preferred it, yes. There was never anything to look at, though, she continued. Just my room, plain white, except for the gray scratch in the lower left corner. I could have sworn some emotion flashed on her face as she recalled that. She allowed herself to drift off in thought for a second or two before slowly coming back to focus. The silence continued for a bit before she asked something that I didn't expect. Will I be blind forever? She whispered. I wasn't sure how to answer that, but as I looked at her, I saw that her face had begun to show some slight concern. So incredibly slight that one may not have noticed it, but it was in such stark contrast to her previous emotionless state that I felt my heart twinge slightly. I just sat in silence, watching her eyes shift slightly as she worked through things in her mind. I've only ever seen a handful of people that I can remember, she eventually continued. I want to see more people, and I want to know what I look like. She glanced at me before continuing. When my home went dark and the machines and doors lost functionality, I thought of it as my chance to see. But as I stepped outside, everything erupted in the most intense white I've ever seen, and since then, I've seen nothing but black. Her face again slipped, her stoic posture dissolving further as she quietly added, Is that all I will ever see again? After an extended silence, I truthfully replied, I don't know. After another pause, I added, Who are the people that you've seen? I don't know their names, she said, her tone growing dark. And they're always screaming. A light rain began to cascade through the needled trees. Screaming because of you? I asked quietly. Yes, she whispered. Because of me. So that's obviously not the end of this story, it's way longer, but I figured I'd upload the first 2 chapters to see if you guys were interested enough for me to continue narrating it, so let me know.